start with business cycles. So over time, the level of economic activity fluctuates. Economists have observed that the level of economic activity tends to go through a cyclical movement with periods of above average rates of economic growth and periods of negative rates of economic growth. Examining the rate of economic growth over an extended period, there appears to be peaks, troughs, recoveries, and downturns. Booms are associated with very high rates of growth in production, but not all peaks in the business cycle will be considered booms. Conversely, troughs are associated with very low levels of economic growth in production, but not all troughs will be considered a recession. So a complete cycle goes from peak to trough and then back to peak. No two business cycles are ever the same. Australia's last recession was back in 1991, so that was the last time we hit this bottom point. We hold the record now for 29 years. It's a world record. No other country has achieved this, but depending on how bad the situation gets with COVID-19, we might see that the June quarter coming up will be the first time we've hit a recession. So we'll be hitting this contractionary period, and hopefully it bottoms out very quickly. We don't know. We won't find out these stats for March until June, and then we won't find out the stats for June until September. So interesting times ahead. So we're going to be defining each one of these terms straight up. So step one is the peak, so the highest point. So consumers and businesses' confidence are high, which may result in people willing to take on more debt. Strong demand may result in firms expanding their production capabilities and demand more labor to complete products. Leakages will be less than injections in the circular flow model, therefore economic activity is rising. Aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply during this peak. A boom. So a boom is where the level of growth is too excessive and unstable. Well, not unstable, unsustainable. Stage 2 is a contraction or a downturn. Excessive inflation and capacity constraints mean firms' ability to increase the volume of production becomes harder. So what they're saying there is eventually we hit the maximum capabilities of our PPF curve and we cannot produce any more. Which causes prices to go up because, you know, once supply is limited, too many people chasing too few goods will drive the prices up. So eventually we'll hit a price where prices are too high and people will stop buying it, and it might cause this contraction or downturn. So higher inflation, higher interest rates, strong growth in asset prices typically results in a market correction, a situation where assets are overvalued and people start to reduce consumption and or investments. They tend to increase savings or pay off debts in response to overvalued assets. If you look at our stock market right now, you can see this there's a market correction occurring. After about, February, March, the ASX 200, let's take a look. So as you can see, bloody hell, last 6 months, so if you see here in February, we were going pretty high. We got up to like 71.62, and then we've just been plummeting down. So that's the market correcting itself. Because people have overvalued these assets, people are panicking, thinking that prices are going to go down. So what they do is there's a manic sell-off of all these assets, and it causes their asset price to go down because now supply is greater than demand for the products. So following the circular flow model, leakages will be greater than injections, resulting in lower rates of economic growth. As a result, unemployment increases, consumer and business confidence decreases, and in turn, inflation reduces. Because all of a sudden, if people are not buying, there'll be a surplus of products. If there's a surplus of products, businesses again discount them in order to get rid of it. And this will hopefully reduce inflationary pressures. We should also note that there's more leakages in the economy because more people will be saving during this time because they're trying to reduce their consumption as best as they can, saving up for that rainy day, and hence why the leakages are increasing. It should be noted also that tax revenue will be a lot lower because obviously people will lose their jobs as consumers reduce their consumption. So tax income will be reduced because people will be laid off or production will slow down, not requiring as many people working in the workforce and generating income to get taxed. Aggregate supply is greater than aggregate demand during this situation. So a trough. The minimum point of economic activity, a trough may or may not turn out to be a recession. A recession is where you have 2 or more consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. A prolonged recession is referred to as a depression, which has not happened in Australia since 1930. For all we know, COVID-19 might set us to a depression. We don't know yet. There's no actual official definition of a depression. Some people say prolonged levels of negative growth. Some people say a drop in real GDP by 10%. But yeah, there's no official statement of a depression. Maybe this will change after everything that happens in the next couple of years. So referring back to the secular flow model, low rates of economic growth will mean less requirements for resources. As a result, unemployment should rise. Leakages will be higher than injections. Inflation rates tend to fall during a trough. So what we're saying is the secular flow model slows down and everything starts going to crap. So aggregate supply is greater than aggregate demand in this case. So recovery during a trough, eventually prices will spiral down to a point where everything becomes attractive. So eventually prices will hit a low point where people just go, hey, you know what? This is a good time to buy. Let's get into this. Because perceived value comes back into play. So if you look at the ASX 200, especially in the last day, you could see it bottomed out and people were just thinking, you know what? This is a good time to buy. And as a result, prices have been climbing again. Over the last 5 days, it's been all over the place because people keep thinking, oh, this is a low point, it's a good time to buy. They buy, and then people become pessimistic again. So in turn, it may promote increased levels of production, employment, income, and expenditure. Injections will be greater than leakages. So yeah, once prices get to a low point, people will start jumping on the bandwagon and things will start circulating upwards again. Following the secular flow model, consumption, investment, and net exports will start to rise over time due to relatively cheaper prices. Aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply. So it's a vicious cycle. Eventually, this pickup in economic growth will again lead to a peak and we'll go through the steps of the economic cycle. In Unit 4, we'll look at what the government can do to reduce the negative impacts on the economic cycle. So booms consist of high growth, high inflation, and low unemployment. Recessions consist of weak production, low inflation, and high unemployment. Stagflation is a situation of low economic growth, high unemployment, and high inflation. This is a very odd situation. I want you guys to figure out how this is possible, where you can have high levels of unemployment but yet high levels of inflation. Because the only reason inflation occurs is if everyone has money and everyone's trying to chase too few goods with all the money they have, which causes a bidding war that drives prices up. But how is it possible that you could have high unemployment where people don't have money and yet still able to cause prices to increase? Good luck. Let me know what you think. So this is the business cycle in the last 10 years in Australia. As you can see, we haven't really had much of a drop in our economic activity. We've only had one negative quarter. Everything else has been above. So you can see here that because it's all above zero, we've been having an expansionary phase the whole time. So even though you can see if it's going downwards here, it's still in positive territory, meaning that we're still growing fast. We're just not growing as fast as we were prior, where we were at like 1.25% here. Alright, so this all represents on this diagram here as an expansion. So we're still expanding. Have we hit our peak? We'll find out when we get the March and June quarters GDP figures. Anyways, if you have any questions about this, email me, holler me up, you know what to do. Have a good night.